Well, thank you very much. I've actually lost my voice for the first time in my life. And I really want to speak to you, so I'm really sorry. The first thing I'd like to say is a huge thank you to Stephen Tyndall. Kia is simply a brilliant idea, and it's typical of him that he had the idea, he's funded the idea, and he's brought us all together. You are truly a world-class citizen wherever you are, Stephen. Thank you very, very much. Because I hadn't realized when I left that such a huge number of people leave this country having got a fantastic education, a fantastic ethical sets of standards, and a brilliant moral compass. We then go off and conquer the world. I decided to do that when I was 10. My best friend, Marion, said to me one day, I'm going to live in America when I grow up. And I said to her, I'm going to live in London. She said, you're really old-fashioned. This is early 60s, pre-Beatles. She said, America's where it's at. So, rather crushed by my friend. She was doing a project on Frank Lloyd Wright's architecture, and I was doing a project on Stuart and Tudor Gardens. So it was an amazing education at MacAndrew Intermediate, which actually, following on from that, when I was nominated to be New Zealander of the Year in London, it was really interesting because one of the other nominees was a guy called Len Cook, who must be the most hilarious statistician ever. And he was the youngest ever permanent secretary, and he's a New Zealander. We both went to MacAndrew Intermediate. I remember him as a rather pesky little boy that Marion and I used to beat up. We were rather larger girls. Do you know, my mother sent me the clipping from the Otago Daily Times. It said, 2 MacAndrew Intermediate children in final in London. He was permanent secretary for the statistical office, and I was just a dame running the City of London. But, you know, the Otago Daily Times got it right, 2 MacAndrew Intermediate children. So you come back. So what I hadn't appreciated was just what a huge percentage of us live abroad. This country can't afford to have us all living abroad and not working for it. And that's where the whole world-class New Zealander Kia thing is just so important. And most of us really want to give back. Not when we first arrive in our new country. When you become an immigrant, you arrive, and I literally arrived with a box of books, a box of records, shows you how old I am, and a box of clothes. And I got a job by post. You don't get that these days either. And I really worked my cotton socks off to become English, to get into the English establishment. And that's actually quite easy as a New Zealander. They don't know where you come from, they don't know what your family is, they don't know what school you went to, you can talk to anyone because you've got a funny accent, and you go up and down the social scale. And that actually is one of the great things this country gives you. I think I also had a lot of confidence because I had to keep up with Marion, but also because the women who taught us at Otago Girls High School, I think, were probably sort of the leftovers from the 1893 suffragette campaign, quite frankly. They basically just told us to go out there, girls, and conquer the world, and quite a lot of us have. Although it's rather ironic that Marion is now running a liberal arts college in Philadelphia and I'm in London, and she always says to me, don't tell me I know London's trendier than Philadelphia. So you win in the end. It just takes time. So I trained as a lawyer, but I spent most of my life dealing with economics, and I often wish I'd paid more attention to Economics 1 all those years ago at Otago University. So economics and public policy, because I got involved in running the City of London, which was a strange thing to do for a New Zealand woman, strange for a woman because they date their modern period from 1067. That was when William the Conqueror came in, and they paid him off, and he built the tower and watched the citizens of London making lots of money. And so the council that I was running was that bit, the world's biggest international financial centre. And what was really interesting about that was everything I did running the City of London was voluntary. And this is one of the main points I want to make today. I learnt from my mother, who was a great New Zealand sportswoman as well as a headmistress, that you always give back to the community. She always coached netball, selected netball players, you know, was out there running up and down with a whistle in her mouth. She gave back to sport because that was her thing. And you think, oh great, that's wonderful, people give back to the community, that's really important, that gives the humanity in our society. Giving of time and expertise is as important as giving of money, quite frankly, because money can't always buy the level of expertise that some people can give back. Both are important, but people's expertise is really important as well. But I found very early on that actually I gained an awful lot from being in the voluntary sector and actually giving back, because I gained a skill set that I could then transfer into my working life. So actually it was a win-win. And I found myself sitting on boards, school boards, university boards, museum boards, and ultimately the great prize, the Royal Opera House board. And I was always above my pay grade, always networking with people more important than me. It slightly helped being a foreign woman at that point, but that was really important to me because it meant when I went back into my law practice, I could chair meetings, I could do things because I was doing things at a much more elevated level in the voluntary sector. So it's a very important lesson to learn. It's a very important lesson if you're ever talking to school children, to give them, to say it's not just about being good, it's actually what it does for you as well. And that's a vitally important thing that I think people don't always realize. So people have often asked me, you know, what's my basic philosophy? What am I? And I just say, well, I'm a shameless opportunist. And I think that is really what I've done. It's just grab every opportunity as it goes past and then work out what I'm going to do with it. Sometimes you make mistakes and you think, hell, I wish I hadn't done that. But if you don't make mistakes, you're not trying hard enough, quite frankly, because you're playing safe. And I think the most important thing is to be able to say, I'm glad I did that. I'm glad I tried that, not, oh, I wish I'd taken that opportunity, because it's passed you by. Now, they come along, opportunities, at the most inappropriate times, but still grab them, because they'll never come along again. And they are then what shapes your life, because I have no life plan, except when I was 10. You know, 10, you can do anything. But I had no life plan. I didn't think, yeah, I'll be a lawyer, I'll get to the top of the legal profession. I have absolutely no idea that I would end up doing what I'm doing. And I still have no idea, really, what I'm going to do next. But some opportunity will come along, and I'll grab it. And with any luck, as I get older, I can perhaps determine those that are good from those that are bad. Not always. Most of my big mistakes I've made fairly recently. Maybe I'm getting too old. Anyway, and so think of yourself as a shameless opportunist. I think the thing I have learnt is because I've been fortunate in working in the private sector, the public sector, and the voluntary sector, I can see the synergies that go across the sectors and know what works and what doesn't work, and what can transfer and what doesn't transfer. And just to give you a few practical examples of the sorts of things I've been really lucky to do. You take the Royal Opera House. when I was little, when I was 6 and going to ballet school. I did 18 years ballet, you wouldn't believe it looking at me now, but I always dreamt, as every little girl in this country dreamt, that she would dance on the stage of Covent Garden. What we didn't realise was New Zealand girls tend to be a bit bigger than ballet dancers. Never forget the first Royal Academy dance examiner who came out, and she was tiny. We looked appalled and thought, we're never going to make it. Still, it carried on, but I never thought I'd chair the board, nor did anyone else, because I was the first woman to do it. But it was very interesting. The Royal Opera House had gone through the most horrendous redevelopment. You know, it was wildly over budget. And I came in as chairman. So everyone was very, very nervous. The board was very split. You had the suits who were there to, I don't know, give us gravitas, I suppose. And then you had the lovies who were there to kind of judge performance, but they shouldn't have because that was the management. And then you had the ladies who lunched. Now, they were brilliant because they brought in the money. They had address books to die for. Now, they didn't actually work coherently as a group. So we were getting on. You got the Royal Ballet, the Royal Opera. You had more divas in the boardroom than you had on the stage. One day, Tony Hall, the fabulous CEO, rang me up and he said, we've got a problem. The BBC have refused to come in and film and broadcast an absolutely brilliant opera with one of the world's greatest comic singers, Natalie Desai. I said, that's appalling. He said, yeah, and he used to run BBC News worldwide. I said, can't you pull some strings? So anyway, we went and finally persuaded them to do it. He and I looked at each other and we said, we're going to have to buy our own production company. Because what we could see, and we had an outreach mission, was there were new channels of communication opening up. Probably some of them are operating in this room today. You know, new channels of communication, new ways of getting information out. He said, we need to control the content. We need to create that content, and it's not just for television. It's going to be digital downloading to cinemas and et cetera, masterclasses straight into schools. Fantastic. So we found a production company to buy, did Tony and I, only it cost £7 million. Now, that's quite a lot of money for an opera house that had been pretty dodgy. So, and of course the suits rose up because they knew all about M&As, and this was going to be difficult, and this isn't what a charity should be doing. The lovies didn't know what was going on, and the ladies that lunched knew that they were going to have to raise a lot more money. So we found this production company, and you know, the opposition to buy it was Spanish telecoms. But what happened was, when we bought it the day before, I had to ring up La Scala, Madrid, Paris, Glyndebourne, Los Angeles, you know, virtually every other opera company in the world, except the Met, and say, tomorrow we own your production company because we bought all their rights. Well, Foireux wasn't in it. Until I said, well, if we hadn't bought it, you'd be the ringtones for Spanish telecoms. At which point they say, oh, thank goodness you've done that on behalf of the opera houses of Europe. Right, smart move, because we actually, at that point, put it into a ring-fence company, and it gift aids its profits back to the house. So not only are we controlling channels, we sold our first film to the BBC and charged them for it. So that is the sort of thing you end up doing when you mix public and private activity. One of the other things that I was very privileged to do was to develop what were called the London Principles of Sustainable Finance. And these became the UN principles. And what happened was, Margaret Beckett, who was the Secretary of State at the time, called me in and said, Judith, we need to do something for the Earth Summit, and we've decided to do something on finance because, you know, we're the world's biggest international financial centre. And I looked around the table, I said, Margaret, you haven't got any financiers around the table. You've only got NGOs, and they all hate finance. So what are you going to do? And she said, oh, yes, maybe we have, do you know anyone who knows about this stuff? So I hot-footed back to the city and said, got to do some sustainable principles. So I rang up my friend Jonathan Porritt, whose father was Governor General many years ago. Jonathan's a star. And so we developed these principles of sustainable finance because actually it was the city that knew about finance and whether it was sustainable. You know, insurers have been doing it for decades. People who have been doing derivatives and contracts, of course, have been doing this stuff for years. Bankers understand what sustainable lending is. So we developed these, Tony Blair launched them, and then the UN was so impressed, they took them over. So fast forwarding to what I'm doing now. It's very interesting in straitened economic times how creative people can get. And when I was leader of the city, I visited New York regularly because it's our sister city. And I noticed that New York was being sort of cleaned up, not by the mayor, although the mayor of New York always claims this. It was a mixture of something called business improvement districts and strong police chiefs. Now, BIDs, or business improvement districts, we've adopted into the UK, and basically what happens is the private sector in an area gets together and says, right, we want to do something about our area. And they put a plan together, it's voted on, and if the vote is passed, then they add a bit to the rates, which are collected by the council, given back to the private sector company. They all become members of it, and then the program's implemented. And I chair the biggest one in the UK, which is the New West End Company, and we've got the streets you probably recognise, Oxford Street, Regent Street, Bond Street, that whole sort of central district. And it's mostly retail and mostly property. But if I tell you £6 billion is spent a year in our streets, you understand how important that is, because 50% of that is tourist, 25% overseas tourists, so it's a huge amount of money coming into our economy. And our main rivals are Paris, New York, etc. But what's important about that is business getting together and actually saying, this is what this district needs. It could be an industrial estate, it could be a high street, it could be any district. And what they need to do is determined by the district. I mean, we have service level agreements with the council and basically then add cleaning and security and meeting and greeting, and we've got huge initiatives with the police to stop smash and grabs and stuff like that. And then we do public realm improvement and transport improvements and things like that. And it's basically business saying, we are democratically electing to do this. We talk to the residents, but we don't spend too much time talking to the residents because they've got the council acting on their behalf. But it's actually very important that business is really involved in its locality and really making a difference. And it's something that I talked to Wellington about on Monday, and I'm going to be talking to the Auckland people about it this afternoon. And I do think it's something that is really important because for a long time we've just held out our hand and expected the state to do everything for us. Actually, business and individuals and groups need to do things as well, particularly in these economic times. And finally, the last thing I'm doing now is a new chairmanship I took over on the Friday I left to come here. It's great. You become chairman in the morning, you fly to New Zealand in the evening. And that is London and Partners for Boris. We've merged the tourist agency, the inward investment and export agency with the agency that promotes higher education, put them all together in one company because we're unifying how we deal with the visitor experience. And there's huge synergies, and then there's a new London brand wrapped around that. Not great timing, given we're on the run-up to the Olympics, but actually we had to do it because the agencies weren't working well together. There was a hell of a lot of overlap. They were actually fighting in some places. So it was quite important to get everyone together to say, you're going to tell this fabulous story about London. You're going to make people who come to London, whether they're leisure visitors or they're here for culture or creativity, or they're here for business, or they're here for a conference, or they're here to study. This is all about the experience that people get. And it's really important because if you're a world-class city, you have to have a world-class vision about yourself, but you must give people a world-class experience when they come to your city. So when I go back in a week and a half's time, that's what I'll be picking up in the run-up to the Olympics, because we've got next year, well, we've got a royal wedding that we hadn't planned that one, but we've got the Queen's Diamond Jubilee through to the end of the Paralympics. There's going to be 100 days of excitement in London. Do come. Don't think we'll rip you off, because we won't. And it's going to be a really exciting time. One thing we have to do is to deal with displacement, because a lot of people say, I won't go to London next year because it's the Olympics and it'll be expensive and there'll be far too many people there. And the transport engineers, as only they can do, will close the city off. We're trying to stop that. So we've actually got this idea of limited edition London. There are going to be some really special events marketed to make sure we don't have displacement, so that the Olympics will be a bonus and not something that actually makes Londoners think, well, okay, we had the Olympics, but overall this year we have all lost out because not so much money has been earned by our companies. So you can see I've had a pretty eclectic career. It's been great fun, and it continues to be great fun, but I couldn't have done it if I hadn't been a New Zealander. Thank you.